First, let me introduce you to my wonderful friend Phil Campbell, whom I've known for many, many years. She's a wonderful gardener, owns the Campbell Road Nursery, is a contributor to the Weekend Gardener on WPTF Radio, as am I. That's every Saturday morning from 8 o'clock until 11 o'clock, and I've often joked that I love the show, but it messes up my Friday night drinking hours because I have to get up too early.
You can't stay up late on
But
Fridays.
anyhow, and I'm Rufus Edmisten. I think I am the longest serving member of the City Club.
I believe that you are, yes, sir.
EOO2, maybe, and then I remember that EOO1 was Mr. Harlan Boyles, who, bless his heart, is deceased, who helped start the club. And I find this club to be very beneficial. I've done everything from Watergate dinners
Yes.
to landscaping, which I don't know a thing about, to history, Watergate story, and more, and now gardening. And so we're very happy, and the audience, I'm sure, loves gardening as much as I do, and as much as Phil does. So Phil, tell us something about you.
Okay, Rufus, thank you. Thanks for the kind words. I'm actually Phil Campbell, and I own Campbell Road Nursery. I've been working there since 1991, and then in 2003, my husband and I purchased the wholesale part of the nursery, and then in 2000, when was it? 6? Yes, it was before I really was ready to. But in 2006...
When you got the money up?
Well, yeah, I didn't quite have the money up, but I had to get it up. In 2006, we purchased the retail center, which was on the corner of Campbell and Tryon. And the background, just a tiny bit of background, we moved the retail center up there in like 97. The retail center and the wholesale center started out on Campbell Road, where we are now, 2804 Campbell Road. We started out there in 91, and people would actually put their money or their check in a mail slot on the side of the building. So,
The honor system.
The honor system. I always said if anybody can take plants, not pay for them, and watch them grow for the whole season, they got a better conscience than I do, or less of one, or whatever.
Yeah.
They just, if they can watch those flowers grow and know they didn't pay for them, that's pretty bad. But anyway, so we're just happy to be back on Campbell Road together now. The retail center, we moved that cabin's over 100 years old. We moved it back down there, and so we're excited. This is our third spring, I believe. Yep, third spring to be there, and the customers are starting to find us and come back, and that's good.
It's a fun place to go. And by the way, Gailey, people say, how in the world would you become interested in gardening? You were a former Attorney General, former Secretary of State.
Yeah.
What's with this gardening bit? Well, I grew up on a farm in Boone, North Carolina, and my older brothers had to go down in the fields and work with the hard stuff on the farm, and I would beg to stay with my mother because she was the church flower lady. Mm-hmm. So I would ask to stay with my mother and work during the day and not have to go to the bottom part where all the hard work was. And so I learned my gardening from my mother, who was the Three Forks Baptist Church flower lady, as I said, and her favorite flowers, Phil, were gladolias and Dutch iris.
Yep.
And she loved beautiful carnations, as she called them, pinks.
Right. Dianthus. Some of the
Dianthus.
dianthus. Right.
Now, I don't know much of I've never known many of the formal names of the garden Latin world, but I know what grows and what doesn't grow.
That's right.
And what not to put in the ground, and what to put in the ground, and when to put it in the ground.
There you go.
And I think that our listeners should, if you've gardened or not gardened, it all starts with the soil, doesn't it, Phil?
That's right.
It all starts with the soil. If you don't have good soil, don't even try to garden.
That's right. If we use a bag soil mix that we get from Old Castle,
Okay.
And we sell that at the nursery. And you must have that or either another reputable soil, because what we do is we advise people to take our bag soil and mix it either with some compost or mulch, maybe pine fines, it's called, and mix that if you're going to do container gardens. But if you're going to do like in the ground,
Right.
you take some of our soil and mix it with the topsoil that you already have. Yeah, if you start out with just solid clay or something like that, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah. Well, that's perfect. So that kind of leads me into our first question is
Okay.
determining how we should plant. So should I plant in containers, raised garden beds, or in the ground? And how do I make that decision?
No, you take a guy like me. I'll let her give you the real details.
Okay.
But I do both.
All right.
I've been on my place on Lake Wheeler for now almost 40 years, and so available land I have is about worn out, especially for tomatoes. I can't plant tomatoes. You want to rotate tomato crop, of course, every year. You don't want to plant tomatoes in the same place because you pick up the diseases you had the day before. And so I do a lot of container gardening, and right now I have a huge pot that would be about a 30 or 40 gallon pot that I have all of my greens, my lettuce, my kale, which I don't even particularly like.
You can give it all to me.
I'm not crazy about kale, but I have 5 or 6 different kinds of greens in that one big pot, and go out there when I want some greens, or Linda, my wife, wants greens. She goes out and cuts it out of that one pot. So that's container gardening at its best. And now, I assume
That also keeps the rabbits out of it.
yes, it does. They will not climb up into that. They don't like to stand on their hind legs.
Yep.
And the other in the soil, I preserve mainly for perennials and trees. And now, Phil, you give your little thesis on that.
Okay. Well, a lot of times people nowadays don't have a large plot to plant things on.
Right.
Used to be people had acres and acres, and so they'd plant this huge garden. And so, and the other part is a lot of the soil in North Carolina, especially around Wake County and areas, has a lot of fungus in the soil.
Okay.
And so the fact that rhododendron grows in the mountains but it won't grow down here very well is because of a fungal problem. So and then so you can control your water better in a container. That's one good thing because it takes a lot to water a large plot.
Right.
But back to what I was saying, a lot of people are in apartments and townhomes and things like that. And so they can still have a really nice container garden or some type of a wood structure that they can grow in above
Right.
ground. And so that protects them as long as the roots can't go down and go, like if it's sitting on cement or
Right.
something like that, so the roots cannot get into the ground,
Okay.
then that protects them from the fungal diseases that are in the soil in North Carolina. So you start out with some really good soil, like we were speaking of just a few minutes ago, and you can either do boxes, like wooden boxes,
Right.
or you can do larger pots, like Rufus was speaking of, 30 or 40 gallon pot, and you can grow your tomatoes in that. Tomatoes is probably the number one problem, or plant that has problems around here right now, and so you can grow those. You can grow your peppers. You can grow cucumbers. You can really grow a vegetable garden in either a wooden box.
Okay.
And what's funny is there's I was looking the other day online at some of the small cottage homes,
Yeah.
and they're starting to put wooden boxes, like installing those for people when they're selling that home. And I think that's great because people do enjoy growing, and it's really good for your mind and your soul
Right.
to grow something and be able to go out and pick up a piece of fruit off of something
Yeah.
or a veggie.
Especially one that you've grown yourself. Right.
Now, a lot of people
Exactly.
have very, very small areas, as Phil said, to grow, and everybody wants to have some plants growing and shrubs and trees.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you're going to plant something in the soil, even though it's not in a pot, you've still got to amend that soil with good compost, with a prepared, I call it compost. Other people might say organic material. And here's a little rule of thumb: dig the hole twice as big as the root ball.
Okay.
This is a big problem that people do. They buy a $50 plant and dig a 50-cent hole. We don't want that. No sirree.
No.
Dig the hole better. Amend the soil around it. If you're planting, and my favorite flower is a camellia, by the way, and have about 70 camellias, and most of them I've gotten from Phil over the years. They're extremely easy to grow. They come in all sizes, from 4 feet tall to 25 feet tall. You have fall blooming camellias called sasanqua, spring blooming called japonica, and you can have flowers blooming at all times of the year. And while we're at it, spring is coming on,
Yep.
and
I hope it's coming fast.
Feels like spring
And-
today.
It
So.
does.
right now it's not too early to plant to seed some of your lettuce and your things like that.
No, it's a
if
good
you
time.
can find if you can find enough dry time to unload Noah's Ark from all the rain.
Well, another reason to put some things in some containers.
Yeah.
You could do some lettuce and some broccoli and things like that in containers right now. It's the early season veggies. It's time for the early season veggies now.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, Rufus, you mentioned compost. So, for beginner gardeners, what is the big difference between compost versus mulch when it comes to gardening and that kind of thing?
A lot of people do compost
Okay.
with their table scraps
Right.
and things like that, peelings from
Except
tomatoes.
don't do meat.
Yeah.
Do not do meat. You'll bring
No.
the raccoons. And,
No. So they do a lot of that, and that's good. It's
Right.
great. But it takes a while for that to really compost down. And then so when I'm thinking about compost, I'm thinking about what a lot of people do is they'll say, oh, somebody will come by and say, we're cutting trees down the road, and then they'll say, oh, bring me a load. Okay? That is not compost. You have to have, if you're talking about wood compost, like that's worked down and okay, what you have to do is be really careful that it has been processed, because if it has not, then it will take all the nitrogen away from your plants. So when I say pine fines, that means that came in a bag, and it's basically old pine bark, but it's been processed and it's gone through a composting. Okay, but a lot of people think of compost as, like we said, the vegetable scraps and things.
Right.
But there's also the composting procedure that goes that the wood goes through as well.
Right.
So if it might sound good if somebody wants to give you a load of tree cuttings and that sort of thing and shredded bark, but you've got to dump it in a pile somewhere and keep turning it a little bit and let it. You'll notice that it's smoking sometimes, and what it's doing is actually composting.
Interesting.
So you have to be really careful, because the reason it's smoking is because it's green and it's hot. And so when you put it on your plants, they're not going to be happy.
Yeah.
Well, those terms are interchangeable. A lot of people use the same term, meaning both. When I think of, I like to think of compost as all the stuff that comes out of the kitchen when you finish your lettuce stems and you put in your leftovers. The other is what I call composted wood chips, and you call them pine shreds.
Yeah.
Just be careful when you buy it that you get something that's really composted, because you could do more harm than good. And my whole theory is deal with a reputable nursery person.
Right.
There, you're in this world of plants. You can sit here and we can talk about 100 different kinds of varieties of camellias, but ask your local nursery person that is trusted and been around for a while and knows what they're doing, and that's your best guide of all.
Right.
Now, the Agricultural Extension Service out of NC State University,
Go Pack.
Kaylee's favorite university, and a nice one. I love the J.C. Ralston Arboretum.
Me too.
I just spoke with Mark Worthington this morning, the director. which, by the way, I should suggest to all of our listeners that if you're not familiar with the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, you should go in all seasons of the year, because they've got something growing there that you can mimic and take a lesson from that visit to use at your own home. So visit the J.C. Ralston Arboretum on Burrell Road at NC State University.
Yeah, it gives you an opportunity to see how things grow.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
And then you say, hey,
the only
I'd
thing
like
they
to have
don't
one
do are
of those.
vegetables, but it
Yeah.
and perennials. They've got perennials, they've got annuals, and I guess it's a good time right now to talk about perennials versus annuals. A perennial plant is something that you plant and it comes back up the next year. It sort of dies down the stalk like tall phlox is a good example of a perennial. And an annual is something you got to plant every year, but some of them will come back from seeding.
Yep.
So my garden is basically composed of perennials because I want them coming back every year.
Right.
And when you mix in bulbs with that seed, we could talk for 5 hours about the different kinds of daffodils that you can have. And any garden should have a mixture of perennials, annuals, and bulbs. Wouldn't you say,
Right.
Phil?
Right. Yeah, for sure. It's a nice surprise when they come back in the spring. And we were talking about compost and mulch a little bit. Well, mulch too. It's good to go ahead and mulch some things, like now even, because it keeps the weeds and grass and things from coming up
Right.
around your perennials and bulbs and things. Just go ahead and put a light mulch coating over the ground now, and then you don't have to use sprays and things like that.
Now, notice she used the word mulch,
Okay.
which would be sort of interchangeable. You could use
Yep.
organic matter too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that when you're talking about those two terms, either one will do as long as you know what you're talking about.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I think when you say mulch, I think that just means kind of putting a blanket over things, a light blanket over things. If you're going to mulch something, and I think that's where the words have come from. The one more thing I'd say on that.
Yeah.
Gardening has become such a big hobby since the coronavirus hit, and they're having to. They ran out of black cow last year for a while. They ran out of a lot of different products, and so you have to be, as Rufus was saying, you have to be really careful where you get your bagged mulch or compost, because they're making it so fast that if you open that bag and there's a certain smell, I can't tell you, but it smells green, and it doesn't. If composted mulch doesn't have much of a smell, okay, but you pop that bag open and it smells and it feels hot or smells green, you better not put it out right now.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I can walk by our flat filler and tell
If it's ready or
if
not.
they're sending us a different soil, or if they've
Interesting.
gotten it out of a different bark pile or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Huh. Okay.
yeah.
Very interesting.
So if you're gardening, you'll learn to do those things. It's important.
Right. Right. Probably with time too. That helps a lot.
Yeah.
So, Phil, you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but fertilization of plants. Like, what is our take on fertilizer? How often should I fertilize? What type of fertilizer should I use if I'm going to do so?
Well, I want to make a country boy statement, then leave it to Phil. When we grew up on the farm, all you knew was 10, 10, 10. You
Okay.
put 10, 10, 10 on the corn, the cabbage, the tobacco, everything in the world. And I'm one of those folks, unless you need it for some deficiency reason, I don't fertilize. Now, Phil.
Okay. A lot of
The
people.
expert.
No, a lot of people, especially my landscapers and some of my customers, they think that the mindset is you put out slow release fertilizer and then you don't have to do anything. Well, that's
Right.
kind of the lazy man's way out or woman's way out. What you do, if you put out slow release in November, then it's just going to sit there because the ground has got to be a certain temperature for that to release. Okay?
Okay.
On the other hand, I saw a landscaper one time put out slow release on his petunias. They were planted in parking lot islands
Okay.
over in Chapel Hill. He literally burned, when it got to be up to 90, 95 degrees, he literally burned the roots of the petunias
Oh no.
because he put what he did was put a slow release, and it got hot, started kicking in, and it kicked in way too much, and it just totally burned the roots.
Gotcha.
So I'm like Rufus. If you don't need to fertilize, the plant will tell you. It'll be looking a little bit yellow. With pansies, they have a bluing color that comes on the leaves.
Okay.
Most plants do look there's a little bit of variegation of yellow and green on the leaves, and it's kind of telling you, hey, I'd like some food now.
Right.
10-10-10 is not bad. It's easy, especially if you're doing a big garden. But you can also water in with some Miracle Grow or something like that,
Right.
and like a ozone or some way like that if you have container gardening. And so I would say be careful with your slow release. Slow release is not bad for shrubs and things. You can go and trees. You can go and put it like around the outside, of the tree. Don't put it right up next to the tree. But what you do is use the canopy as a place to put it down.
Gotcha.
So that's a good thing, okay? But I would not put slow release on any veggies or flowers
Okay.
because you lose control
Right.
when you put that out.
It's like hard to monitor.
Right. If it's too cold, it's not going to do anything.
Yeah.
You're wasting your money. If it's too hot, it could burn them up.
Okay.
Well, I began my spring planting really for, besides cool weather vegetables.
Right.
I use April 15 as the cutoff date, which is a bad thing for your taxes if you go past that. But it's a great time. It's called frost-free date.
Okay.
And so I go to Phil's and I get several flats of impatiens, not impatient, impatiens.
I have the impatient.
You have impatiens, right? And begonias
great.
mix very, very well. And I flood several, probably 25 or 30 pots, so they hang over one another when they get full bloom. And I do fertilize them with a water soluble fertilizer
Okay.
about 3 times during the summer,
So
because they will leach out and they will need some fertilizer. But I'm just not one of those folks that think, okay, here's a plant, throw the fertilizer to it. If it doesn't need it, why do it? It's just going to leach out anyway.
Yep.
And I think people tend to over fertilize more than lack of fertilizer.
They do. For the most part, yeah, when Rufus says leach out, that means if we have this huge rain, it can wash everything right out of that pot. And of course, then it's going to get into your groundwater and go downstream and that sort of thing. So just a little bit all along, like he's talking about, is better.
Right.
Because it's not going to do good if you over fertilize. So,
So hypothetically, let's say I'm a beginner gardener, right? I've planted my plants, yada yada, all that good stuff. How do I know when my plants are well established, when the root and whatnot? And what does that mean? Can you explain to us what that really means?
okay, let me go back to one more thing.
Yes.
Rufus just said. We'll hold that
Hold that
question
thought.
right
Yep,
there.
Putting a pin in it.
Rufus said April 15th.
Okay.
You have to be careful
All right.
because that is not the drop dead frost date.
Okay.
I lost a whole crop of peppers one time that I was growing to sell, actually, on about the 23rd of April.
Okay.
So you have to be really mindful of what the weather's doing.
Oh, yes.
Okay, just
That's
because
a general rule, April 15th.
the general rule is April
April
15th
15th,
around
okay.
here, but
Now, I wouldn't put out a tomato at all until the 1st of May.
because it'll sit there and just
It-
go, what do you want me to
it-
do, grow?
You see, the people don't realize that they try all kinds of tricks to try to increase the maturity of a tomato, for instance. And until the garden soil is warm and ready to sell, it won't do a bit of good. It'll just sit there in the cold and say, I'm waiting for summer. I'm waiting
Waiting for the ground
Florida."
to warm up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now her question
yeah.
was,
How do you know when
well,
it's
how
established?
do you know when a plant's established?
And what does that mean?
Yeah. What does it mean?
Well, all I know when a plant is established is when I water it and it doesn't totally fall over all the way.
Okay.
When it stands up straight and has a different color color to it, a sort of a darkening color, because that means the plant's getting stronger. And if you plant it the way you should plant it with the right soil, you shouldn't see too much difference from when it comes out of one of Phil's trays than 3 weeks from that time, if it was a good plant and planted in the right soil conditions. So now on perennials, sometimes it takes a little longer for a plant to mature, but it's worth the wait.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of the fun of gardening. When you plant a plant and start watching it grow, you will see the new leaves and what's called the new growth coming out on a plant. And when that happens, that means that it's becoming established.
Right.
Okay? They're like people. You know, you move into a new house. Well, when are you established?
Right.
In that neighborhood? Is when you feel comfortable and you've met a few people, or at least said hello to a few people, and you know that everything's okay. Well, a plant's the same way. Okay, I'm getting water, but not too much. I've got a little bit of food, but not too much. And I've got some good soil to grow in. So then I'm going to start putting out my roots, and I'm going to start putting out new growth on top. And so that's the best way to tell. Now, if you're doing container gardening, and you could do this in the ground, you can do a little tug, take the stem of it, just gently tug on it, and if it feels tight, then you know it's. But if it's growing and sending out new growth and looking happy, and not wilted, you're fine.
Okay.
I need to ask Phil a good question.
Please.
In container gardening,
Yes.
I change my soil about every 2 to 3 years.
I was going to say
is that necessary?
With tomatoes, I would
Every
change
year.
my soil every year.
Right.
But with most other things, I think that every 2 to 3 years is good. You need to add some new soil to it every year, because when you pull your plants out, you're going to pull out that big root ball and soil. So then you put some fresh soil in, because plants, what I say they do is they use up the soil. There's nothing else left in that soil for them to do. So you have to mix in some new soil with those.
I think one thing we've left out here too, Kelly, is houseplants.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We can definitely chat about houseplants.
Linda, my wife, has a typical kitchen window that has got beautiful sun coming in it, and my window too, by the way. And her favorite plant is cyclamen that she got from Phil. Oh, it's been 10, 12 years ago, and it still pops up these wonderful little beautiful blooms every year. Violets are another house plant.
African violets.
It goes along with this gardening all year long, no matter what. There's certain plants that I take in, like the big grapefruit tree that Linda planted when she was a little girl. And I'm not going to tell you how old that plant is right now, because she would be
not happy.
She wouldn't be real happy with that.
Yeah.
But I bring it in every year in what I call the Florida room. And you can have, my point is, you can have something blooming in a garden, whether you live on a beautiful landscape place with 5 acres, or whether you live in an apartment with a balcony with getting some sun. You need sun and water and some fertilizer, and you can have something blooming all year long wherever you live.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's for sure.
Absolutely. Phil, you kind of mentioned when we were talking about being well established, the watering aspect of it.
Yep.
So I just want to chat about that. How often should you water? I feel like there's some kind of people don't really know. Some people water every day. Some people do it every other. Just what is, I guess, the right kind of way to figure that out for your indoor-outdoor plants?
What do I say on the Weekend Gardener? The biggest.
They'll tell you when they need water.
Well, the biggest, I think one of the biggest way people kill plants is to overwater.
Right.
Plants typically do not need that much water.
Really?
No. If they're in the ground and they're established,
right,
then they probably will not need that much water at all. And if they do, they'll start to wilt. The top of a tomato plant will bend down a little bit, or the leaves will start to wilt down a little bit. Most of the time that means it needs some water. Sometimes that could mean that it's gotten a fungal disease, okay? Or some type of disease. So you have to, as long as your leaves are nice and green and everything looks good about the plant, but it just starts to bend a little bit. And that's the way any plant is. Vinca, the flowering vinca that you plant in the summer does not need much water at all. But when it starts to need water, the leaves will curl or just bend over. Begonias, a lot of people plant begonias. When begonias need water, the leaves will start to turn a little bit of a whitish tint. Okay, it's really weird. They'll go along and they'll look really good. They get this little white looking on them, and that means I need water because the leaves are so firm with the begonia that it can't just wilt down. And so they'll start looking a little bit white. But for the most part, any plant that needs water will let you know. And that's something, if you're just starting out with gardening, that's something just like being able to smell the mulch and the soil. It's something that you really need to try to pay attention to and just get connected with it, because then you'll know. You'll just know. The plant will let you know.
Is that the same for plants that you have, like potted plants, I guess? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And for goodness sakes, on a potted plant, do not let any water stand in the saucer beneath.
Okay.
Do not.
And make sure, number one, make sure you have before you do container gardening, you will totally fail if you don't have drainage holes in the bottom of your pot.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that is the number one. A lot of people will see this really nice container or pottery pot and they go, oh, I want one of those. And then
never look to see if there's a hole in it.
Never look to see if there's a hole in it. Go throw soil in it.
And I've tried. You can't drill one in either.
No. And then it fills up with water, and then your plants are just floating.
Yeah, I remember one time, Kaylee, somebody gave me a beautiful pot, and I turned it over, and there was no hole. And I said, I've got to make a hole, so I took an electric drill and
yeah, you have to have a certain
100 pieces.
You have to have a certain drill bit. Yeah, there's a masonry drill bit that you can use. So you have to be careful.
So there went that pot.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's funny.
Yeah.
So in your garden, if you had a garden infestation problem, which we've kind of talked a little bit about, the different diseases plants can get, what steps would you take to get rid of that? Or like, how would you handle that situation? I guess what would you do?
Of course, it depends on what kind of disease you have.
Right.
A lot of folks do not like to use a lot of disease control chemicals. If you've got the one thing I use a lot is what we call horticultural oil. It's not. This is not considered to be a disease killer that's got that environmental concerns about it. It smothers little insects and mites and whiteflies.
Okay.
And a lot of people use soap and water.
Right.
If
dishwashing detergent mixed with water.
Dishwashing detergent. Okay. But you will normally find out that a disease plant by looking underneath the leaf.
Okay.
That's where to look first. When you feel, look underneath.
Or the roots.
That's
but the leaves, yes, definitely first. Just check those out. Make sure there's no aphids, whiteflies.
Yeah.
Any kind of lace bugs on azaleas, things like that. But as far as root diseases, there's been a lot of landscapers that have had, and people, citizens, private citizens, that have had to take all of the soil out.
Wow.
And then I know over at NC State, close to the bell tower one time, there was a lot of problems with the vinca. They'd plant vinca.
Right.
And it wouldn't. And see, vinca and pansies. Rufus spoke to this earlier. They're the same. They're in the same family.
Okay.
So if you plant vinca, and then you plant pansies, and then you plant vinca, and then you plant pansies, it's not going to work.
Okay.
You've got to rotate your crops. So you've got to rotate your flower crops as well as your vegetable crops.
Gotcha.
So what you would need to do is say at some point, if you have problems every year, you probably need to take that soil out and put some new soil in.
Right.
Okay, and then of course it's easier in containers if you start to have problems with dieback, but you just have to. I don't recommend using a lot of fungicides and that sort of thing, but the biggest problem that we have around here is fire ants. Now that's not a disease, but it's a big problem.
Yeah.
Because we brought so many, we're building so much so fast. We brought so many trees and shrubs from down south, way down south, into the area. And if you'll look around, almost every tree that's been planted in some of these larger landscapes, you'll see a mound of fire ants.
Huh.
So that is one of the big problems right now, and I just say be careful with them because they're dangerous. They're very dangerous. So, but as far as disease goes, probably the easiest thing is to change your soil out if you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Rufus, anything else to add to that, or? I think Phil might have covered that one.
Just run away from the fire ants and get you some fire ant control. Now that's when you can use a chemical.
Yeah.
And be sure to follow the directions. I know some idiots that take it and pour it down the hole.
Oh, no.
You don't do that. You pour it around so that the fire ants will take it down and kill into the hole to kill the rest of them.
That's really funny.
I can tell you a couple of things that I would recommend.
Yeah.
There's a fire ant control. I'm not sure I think you may have to have a pesticide license to buy it, but just know about it.
Right.
It's called Fipronil, and
Okay.
it's supposed to last for a year, and it does.
Wow.
We put it out at the nursery. The other thing is, and since we're not a business, I think I can mention this.
Yeah.
Amist Garden is a local company, and Marilyn is the person that owns that, and she started that. And Amist Garden has mole and vole, and there's a difference in those.
Okay.
And it also has all types of animal repellents that work really well, and it does not have any poison in it.
Okay.
It's done pretty much by the scent.
Oh, wow.
And so WPTF recommends that, and I highly recommend it. We have it at the nursery.
Yeah.
And the mole and vole is really a good product.
Okay.
Yeah, they make up a mixture. I used it. I had squirrels eating my tomatoes, and I sprinkled a good deal around the tomato plants, and it stopped the squirrels. It smells so bad to them.
Right.
And it's all natural.
It smells herbal.
And another brand that I like in the way of fertilizer that you're never going to get too much with is Espoma products. Now they don't pay us to say that, but Espoma.
Not paid to advertise.
We're not paid to advertise
And blood
at
meal.
all. And blood meal.
But they have blood meal. Espoma has blood meal.
Okay.
Blood meal is great for pansies.
You're never going to worry about having too much fertilizer in high quality with Espoma.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good one.
Yeah.
So if y'all were going to give a friend a gift who is starting to garden, what would be the basic gardening tools? Just like maybe 2 or 3, very basic gardening tools a beginner would need.
Well, I'm going to start out with a good shovel that have 2 kinds of shovel. One with a flat head, a square head, and another one with a pointed head. I'm going to do what do we call those?
Like trowels.
Trowels. I'm going to have 3 or 4 good trowels.
Yep.
I'm going to have a claw trowel. And I'm going to have something. I've noticed this, that people tend to don't. I would not give anybody a gift unless they promised me that they would take and clean them every time when they use them. It's so little trouble to squirt them off.
Yeah.
And spray them with oil.
Yeah.
Or
wipe them with alcohol.
WD-40.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's just so easy to do, and they look better, they keep better, and that little bit of oil is not going to hurt your soil.
Right.
So what else do you need except a gardening apron?
Okay. One more thing you need is a really nice set of clippers, hand clippers, and a set of loppers.
Okay.
Now, those need to be cleaned as well with alcohol or something, even in between cuttings. I know that when you change from bush to bush. Because if you end up doing some roses and maybe just some of your trees, you want to limb them up a little bit.
Right.
So it's good to have a really nice pair of clippers, hand clippers, and a pair of loppers.
Okay.
When she said good, that's what I mean, because you can buy cheap hand clippers.
Cheap.
They will last maybe half a season.
Yeah.
Right.
So invest in a good set of heavy duty,
For a while.
reliable hand clippers.
Yes.
And I have one that's a ratchet type that I like, that I found at a garden show one time. You cut a certain section, and then you release it and go and get another section. A ratchet type. I love that one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. So then my last question for y'all before I kind of let y'all just share like any of your top gardening tips or your favorites or whatever you guys feel passionately about to share is, what are going to be some of the easiest vegetables to grow? Like just the easiest ones for someone to not totally
Easiest
mess up.
what to grow?
Vegetables.
Vegetables.
If you're growing in a container, tomatoes are pretty easy.
Okay.
If you're growing in a container, I'll tell you my top ones. I grow in my containers. I grow tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and squash. And all of those have their little quirks, because if your cucumbers and your squash are not being pollinated,
Right.
then you have to either do it yourself, and the tomatoes, well, all of it has to be pollinated, but especially the cucumbers and squash.
Okay.
But I mean, I love okra, and I tried some in containers, and it's okay, but those are probably some of the easier. You get into your watermelons and cantaloupes and things like that, you're going to have a lot more space, and they're not quite as easy. To me, they're not quite as easy to grow.
Right.
Yeah, I got in a real macho mood one time. I was going to grow tomatoes as big as this table here, or watermelons. And what I did, I covered up all my planting space. I had room for nothing else.
Oh no.
So unless you've got
With that
acres, don't try the melon. Don't try the melon deal. I like eggplant.
Okay.
That one is pretty easy for me to grow, and in containers too.
Yeah, it
And
does well.
I tend to do more in the. I live very close to the farmers market,
Okay.
and I got friends like Phil who grow all kinds of. I don't grow as many vegetables because I want to save my soil for the beautiful plants that I have.
I'm the same. Probably the same way. Yeah.
Just because I know a lot of people love to grow vegetables, but if you got to make a choice of having a little bit of everything or go big time with one or the other.
Yes, sir.
And I'd like to go with my flowers, with my perennials and annuals. There's just so many wonderful plants out there that right now I love looking at the seed catalogs, although I don't order anything out of the seed catalogs anymore.
It's just fun.
I'm getting too lazy. I'm not going to grow them. I used to grow my seeds inside my basement.
Really?
With growing lights. And I had a magnificent thing going on. And I was Attorney General at that time. And I was afraid somebody might accuse me of growing marijuana.
That's right. They see those lights on.
So I had those lights down there in the basement. So I decided to stop that. So I'm going to put most of my things into beautiful gardenias and camellias.
Well,
And Japanese maples.
one thing you talked about, though, you did talk about your, you can actually put the lettuce and kales and things like that in with some of your flowers.
Yes.
In the flower beds or in the containers. And, I mean, you're growing those in
Well, you
containers
got to like
right
kale
now.
more than I do then.
Well, but you got lettuce. You got your lettuces. Yeah, I know. I know. You don't like kale.
Yeah.
But anyway. Yeah.
The club does a lot of kale, don't you?
I enjoy kale personally. I just think that's like a generational
Yeah,
thing, though.
I like kale.
My generation, I think, is very into the greens and the kale.
Yeah.
Well, those are all the questions I have for y'all. But any other knowledge y'all just think someone would need to know to start a garden, or any fun facts, or if you want to share maybe your favorite flowers, Rufus, I would love to hear about that, or anything y'all.
Well,
wanna
the
close
thing
with.
about gardening is it gives you such an inner peace. I can have the worst day in the world and wake up and take a walk around the garden. And I have this little habit of when I was working real hard as Attorney General, and even back when I worked for Senator Ervin in Washington, way back in the day, way back, I would get clippings from people when I visit their homes, and I would bring them home and root them. That's a whole nother area of how to propagate plants that we could spend hours on. And I've propagated a lot of plants over the years and planted them in different parts of the garden. And to wake up even when you're just feeling so lousy and mad at the whole world, you walk around and remember your friends through your plants. And I would say, okay, this was from Mr. Clyde Nolan over in Shelby 25 years ago when I visited. He gave me a clipping of this gardenia. This is General Alexander Killens, who I decided that he decided that I needed a camellia clipping. I visit my old friends, and especially the deceased ones, through treks around the garden.
Right.
And gardening is such a peaceful thing. I used to say this. I rarely saw many people in prison when I was Attorney General, and that was sort of my business to put a lot of people in jail. I rarely saw people that were gardeners that went to jail.
Something to be said for that.
There got to be something for inner peace. So this Rufus Edmisten, what's he doing gardening? It's very natural to me. It's been my stress release all these years. When everything got bad, I could the Bible speaks of retiring to the garden, the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Gethsemane. Their whole books on gardening in the Bible, by the way.
Yeah, there are.
And it's just my way of controlling the steam that keeps building up in the human brain and from exploding. So that's what I like about gardening.
Absolutely. Phil, do you have anything to add to that?
A couple things.
Yeah.
I grew up and learned how to garden with my grandparents, and my dad had a greenhouse, a small greenhouse at our house that I grew up in, but I mostly learned with my grandparents up in Alamance County.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of red buds and a lot of dogwoods that always bloomed, and I would love to walk in the woods at their place and see those and enjoyed those. And so I brought a lot of red buds from my granny's, and I brought dogwoods. But I also brought cedar trees, just plain old cedar trees like you see growing on the fence lines. Well, I almost cut, and the birds have planted those cedar trees all over my yard because they ate berries, and then they planted them for me. So this past Saturday morning, I went out to take my dog out, and I could hear this weird noise, and it was birds. It was wings fluttering and birds chirping. And what they had done was robins had come in by the hundreds.
Oh, wow.
And they had gotten in all of our cedar trees, and they were cleaning the berries off. They were eating every berry. They did that. And then this morning they were still around. And then right behind the robins, which makes me hope for spring, right behind the robins was the cedar waxwings. And if you've never seen cedar waxwings, they'll eat holly berries and cedar berries, but they'll eat the holly berries and they're fermented, and it makes them drunk. And so they have to sit in a tree.
Really?
Yep, and they fly in a group. And so they'll sit in a tree, and then they'll just sit there for a while, and then when they start feeling better, or they'll go drink water, they'll go and eat the berries again. And it is one sight to see.
That's hilarious.
But just to say, I've almost cut some of those cedars down, and then when I saw that, because they're not where I planted them.
Right.
But when I saw that this weekend, I'm like, my yard's not perfect by any means. But I'm just going to leave everything like it is, because obviously somebody's got a plan better than the one I had.
Yes, ma'am. He always does.
Even though Phil is a commercial establishment, she has her own gardening area herself, and has the common problems that all of us have. And If she doesn't know something, she'll tell you.
Right.
And I don't know anybody that can tell you everything in the world about plants. You just got to start loving them.
Yeah, I didn't go to school for plants at State. I did some natural resource courses.
Yeah.
But I just learned by trial and error.
Yes, ma'am.
And I can tell you when a plant's not happy,
Okay.
and when it is happy.
Yep.
So that's what we're going to hope for this spring, right?
Absolutely.
All happy plants.
Happy plants. I don't know.
And
So
I hope
happy
for-
gardening, all of you
for
out there.
everybody.